Let's get into it. Soul Not For Sale podcast. We have talked about mass formation at length in this podcast, and we are going to touch on it again. But this time, the part of mass formation that we're going to touch on is the power of speaking up. Because in these times, when we're seeing all of this upside down inversion, where good is bad and bad is good and men are women and this and that, in these times, it's so essential for you to speak up. Not for you to get violent, not for you to get, not like that, but just for you to speak up. The power of that alone. So what I'm going to show you is Riley Gaines and Joe Rogan talking. Now, Riley Gaines is actually, if you listen closely, she is talking about her time being engulfed in mass formation. Then she gets woken up by the power of someone speaking up. And then she retells some more of the story of what actually pushed her over the edge and made her realize, this is a dream world. I have to shake myself out of this. This is not right. Now, we're going to start with the Joe Rogan clip. Then we're going to move on to Jordan Peterson talking about his re-education that he had to face, because this is also something Riley Gaines had to go through. In these woke times, when woke is so similar to the starting stages of communism, we start to see a lot of re-education. So Riley had to go through that. Jordan Peterson's going to talk about that. And then I'm going to show you a clip of someone who is actually in a mass formation, in a re-education camp. I'm going to show you the similarities from what they say and what Jordan says and what Riley says. And then we're going to touch on Tucker Carlson having a conversation with a gentleman about mass formation. And that is where he's going to talk about how essential it is for you to speak up in these times. Do not go silent, because when we go silent, that is when things get the worst. And then after that, I'm going to show you a couple of clips of Pierce Morgan and Riley Gaines with Officer Tatum talking about how difficult it is to be a woman. Let's get into it right now. Riley Gaines first. Let's go.
A 6'4" man in a women's swimsuit with a bulge next to a woman wearing only a Speedo with nothing covering her top. Your reaction was my reaction, because I'm sitting there watching this. I'm thinking to myself, it's me. I'm the crazy one. It must be. This is the freaking Twilight Zone.
How does the audience react to this? Like when Leah Thomas gets on the block, when they're about to start a race. How does the audience react to this?
As you can imagine, right? Like, there was a lot of silence. A lot of people didn't really know what to do, what to say. There wasn't a lot of clapping. There was a lot of like protesters and like trans rights activists who were there, who were being loud, and the posters and blah, blah, blah. Lots of booing. Kelly J. Keane was there, who is a phenomenal women's rights activist out of England. And she was there, and I'll never forget, I'm standing on the pool deck. And at this point in time, like, of course, me and all my teammates and my coaches, we all knew this was wrong, but it's still, I didn't know how to talk about it or what to say or what outlet to go to. And I remember hearing her from the stands, and she just said something that we were all thinking, and she yelled so loud, "He's a cheater." And I was like, oh my gosh, I needed to hear that. So there was a lot of booing, as you can imagine, lots of silence.
And through this, so you have the loud trans rights protesters. And is there anyone countering that? Are there loud pro-women sports protesters?
There were. Not as loud, if I'm going to be honest, not as ugly, which I think that gets a lot of media time when you have these men with beards and these big signs. That certainly catches a lot of cameras. So they were definitely there. And looking back, like I said, like being able to see them, it inspired me. It gave me courage to be willing to kind of put my name and face to it. Because I was scared at first. Based on just kind of the silencing tactics that were used to keep us quiet, right? Like, we were told, you'll never get a job if you speak out about this. Your employer is going to look you up and see that you're a transphobe. And you don't want that, do you? You don't want everyone to think that you're transphobic.
Was this a conversation that someone actually had with you?
Yeah. We had to go to training, Joe, to learn how to
accept that you're being cheated.
A senior in college.
Yeah.
21 years old.
Yeah.
They brought in an outside professional, again, air quotes, because what in the world, how can you be an outside professional who sat us down and taught us how to use she, her pronouns? Again, a senior in college. I'm like, am I really?
Taught you how? You, an actual she, her.
An actual she, her.
How do you use she, her pronouns?
We had to go through these interview questions. They threw a question at us. If we didn't answer their fake interview question to their standard. We had to go through it again.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Indoctrination.
Thomas's teammates, right? 16 of these girls, plus their parents at the beginning of the season, signed on to a letter expressing their discomfort in the locker room. I kid you not. The university responded back with, and I have a screenshot of their response. If you, as women, feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here are some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourselves.
Re-educate yourself that that's a sheenus. That's not a penis.
That's a sheenus.
Oh.
Queenus penis.
So does Leah Thompson have sex with girls?
What?
Leah Thomas, rather.
Yeah. At the time, again, this is what I know based off of what his teammates have told me and what really has been public knowledge based off what they post and different things. At the time of that national championships, he was still dating women and active with women.
Sexually. So obviously has testosterone.
Yes. But now, again, based off of social media, he is engaged to another man who claims to be a woman. So 2 men, but they call themselves lesbians. So who knows? But yes.
But at the time. So
yeah.
if you're on that team, you're a woman and you have a biological male who's intact, who's having sex with women, walking around naked in the locker room with women. And if you're uncomfortable with that, you should educate yourself.
You
and
said
learn
it.
how to use she, her pronouns and accept defeat.
You said it.
To this person that's not a woman.
You said it.
And the whole idea behind Title IX was supposed to be to protect women's sports. It's supposed to be to have a place where women can compete fairly against women.
Yeah.
And because of this insane cult that 45% of the country's in, or whatever it is, you have to deal with this literal mental patient in a woman's sport dominating, and everyone's cheering.
Yes.
And everyone around it that's watching it is upset. All the parents, probably on both teams.
Of course.
All the women that are competing with this man. And the whole world's like, yay, diversity. And you must feel like you're in a fucking movie or something.
Well, I'll tell you, really what had thrusted me over the edge into no longer being willing to lie, ultimately, is he and I raced in the 200 freestyle. This is the day after he swam the 500 freestyle and won a national title, beat out Olympians, beating out American record holders, right? Keep in mind, these aren't scrubs. They're the most impressive and accomplished female swimmers this world has ever seen. And again, he beat them all by body lengths. 1 second might not sound like a lot of time, but in the sport of swimming, again, measured down to the 100th of a second, 1 second is significant. He beat the entire nation of women by almost 2 full seconds. Even the time he went last year would have beat every girl in the country this past season by nearly 2 full seconds, making him the first man to win a Division I NCAA women's title, trailblazer. But the second day of competition, the day after this, he and I race in the 200 freestyle. So, look, we get on the blocks, dive off, swim 8 laps of freestyle, touch the wall at the end. I look up at the scoreboard, and almost impossibly enough, Joe, we had gone the exact same time, meaning, of course, we had tied, which is it's incredibly embarrassing for a 6'4" man to not even be able to beat like a 5'5" female. But again, going a minute and 40-ish seconds and not even 1/100th separated us. You can't tell me that's not divine intervention. But tied, we get out of the water, we go, you can see here, we both went 143.40. Not one of us going 143.39 or 143.41, tying. Get out of the water, go behind the awards podium. The NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself. Thomas, who is towering over me, right, 6'4", and this official looks at both of us and says, "Great job, you two. But you tied, and we only have one trophy, so we're going to give the trophy to Leah. Sorry, Riley, you don't get one." My
Jesus Christ.
Heart rate was still high, having just competed. My adrenaline was still pumping. And so the first thing that I thought ended up being the first thing that I said. And the first thought that I had was just what you had just said, right? Like, isn't this everything that Title IX was passed to prevent from happening? What do you mean you're going to give the trophy to the man in the women's 200 freestyle? I asked the question that no one dared ask all season. And I said, why? Which, of course, he didn't have an answer as to why. They didn't give him a script of what to say when someone asks you the dreaded question of why. And so his first excuse he came up with, he's stumbling on his words, and he's, well, We're actually just doing this in chronological order, he said. And so I said, okay, do you mean alphabetical? Because G comes before T. Otherwise, I literally have no idea what you're being chronological about, right? We tied. So again, what's your rationale here? And finally, he realized that he didn't have a justification. He didn't have an answer for this. And so, and I actually appreciate his honesty. This is when his face changed. He looked sad. His voice changed. I could tell he didn't even believe what he was about to say. But this official looked at me and said, Riley, I am so sorry, but we have been advised as an organization that when photos are being taken, it's crucial that the trophy's in Leah's hands. Again, you can pose with this one, but you have to give yours back. Leah takes the trophy home. You go home empty-handed, end of story. We can eventually mail you one.
Oh my God.
Is what they said. So it was like that moment when I felt guilty at that point. I felt guilty for participating in the farce. I felt guilty for even getting in the water at this point. And so it kind of hit me. I won't say I was necessarily cowering because it didn't feel like that to me. I wasn't necessarily scared to approach the topic. I just thought someone else would. I thought a coach would say something. I thought some other swimmer. I thought someone with political power, someone within the NCAA. Quite honestly, I thought someone's dad would come down there and yank this man out of our locker rooms. But it was in that moment where we were standing on the podium, myself included. I'm standing on the podium, and we're clapping, and we're smiling, and we're cheering, and it hit me. I'm like, what in the world are we clapping for? Because, I mean, really what we're applauding is our own erasure, our own demolition. And so it was right then and there that, again, like a slap across the face, I was like, how in the world can we, as women, as female athletes, expect someone to stand up for us if we aren't even willing to stand up for us? Like, this has to come from us. So again, I knew all season the unfair competition was wrong. I knew all season that the locker room aspect was wrong. I knew that the silencing that we were facing from our universities, I knew all of that was wrong. We all did. But it wasn't until this official reduced everything that we had worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity of a man at the expense of our own. That's really when I decided that I couldn't continue being silent.
Man, this is very, very interesting. And, you know, the first time I listened to this, because I listened to all the episodes like twice, sometimes 3 times, you know, and after this time when I listened to it, I was like, oh, this is, and I've been looking deeply into Saul Alinsky's work, and I've been looking into Marxism a bunch, and there's like a whole bunch of stuff that I've been, you know, studying, you know, reading over here and there. And I started realizing, oh, this is mass formation. That's what was happening to her. That's 100% what was happening to her. I mean, right at the beginning, she said, I must be the crazy one. She saw someone who had no top on, that was a woman, that was a lady, and just bottoms, and everybody was fine. So she thought, I must be the crazy one. Why? Because nobody was speaking up. Then she said, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to talk about it. She knew that what was going on was wrong. She understood fully that it was wrong and still went along with it. That is what happens in these regimes as they take over. Every step of the way, everybody silently knows it's wrong, but nobody wants to be the person to make others feel uncomfortable, to make others feel excluded, to be seen as intolerant. Nobody wants to be a bad person. So everyone goes along with it, and they just keep going along with it. Then, what's it say here? He's a cheater. This woman, this activist yells out, he's a cheater. And that shakes her awake a little bit. She goes, I needed to hear that. She said it in the video. I needed to hear that. The reason she needed to hear that is because it validated the thoughts she was having silently. And the reason that I'm walking through all this is because this is what you can do. This is what you can do now. You don't need a huge platform. You don't even need a channel. You can just be a person, and when you see something that is backwards and inverted, you can say something and say, that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that. You can say that. You can nudge someone and say, that's messed up, huh? It helps shake people awake. You can't allow people to just fall asleep. And then on top of that, the protesters, the people who are seen as intolerant, in this case, transphobic, probably a little misogynistic because she said they're big men. You know, they're branded as everything. Ignorant, racist, this, that. They're branded as everything. They didn't care, and they inspired her. And I only say that to say, you might feel like, hey, I'm going to make someone uncomfortable with my thoughts and feelings on this topic. But I know what's right. I know what's wrong. Say it anyway. Say it with your, what's that old saying? Say it even though your voice trembles as you're saying it. Say it anyway. You have no idea who it's going to inspire. And then the re-education, which we're going to touch on now. She got gaslit into thinking that she was the problem. If she had an issue, she needed re-education, right? And we're going to talk about Jordan Peterson as well. And then she thought someone else would do it. She thought someone else would step in. And that's what we're all collectively thinking. Even now, as we see everything that's going on, we're all sitting back thinking, someone else is going to handle this. No one's just going to allow this to happen. No. Surely some entity, people, maybe the politicians will just have a coming to Jesus, Allah, Hashem moment. I don't, maybe. But that's not what's going to happen. It's going to be you. It's going to be you that does something. Now, Canadian courts ordered Jordan Peterson to take re-education program. You know, this is very chilling, especially if you know that in these communist regimes and in the West, we have these woke regimes. This is what they do. They put people through re-education. You know, Hillary Clinton actually suggested it just a little while ago about Trump supporters. She said maybe they need some kind of re-education or something like that. She really suggested that. It's crazy. Let's hear Jordan Peterson talk a little bit about his re-education right now.
The court that we appealed the College of Psychologists' decision to decided that the college it's within the college's purview to stop me from having any political opinions, as far as I can tell. The decision, which I posted on Twitter and will post in the description of this video, starts out by making a case for the fundamental reality of freedom of speech for Canadians in Canada, and then says, but, and that's always a bad start when you're talking about freedom of speech, but apparently the college has the right to decide that I can be re-educated forcibly with the risk of my license, essentially because I made political statements that the members of the college don't agree with. And those opinions involve two criticisms of Justin Trudeau, one criticism of his chief of staff, one criticism of an Ottawa city councillor, and then my objection on Joe Rogan to the climate apocalyptic fear-mongering that idiot tyrants are foisting on the general population. Now, apparently that makes me unprofessional and a disgrace to the profession, such that I am now going to be required, the college can go ahead with this, to put me into a re-education program with their so-called social media experts, and that's also, by the way, a profession that does not exist, until I learn my lesson, whatever that is, regardless of how much time that takes, by their judgment, or they can take my license away. And so the court says, well, of course you have freedom of speech, Dr. Peterson, but because you're a professional, you're bound by your professional organization. And apparently they're not bound, even though they're a government organization, fundamentally. Apparently they're not bound by that fundamental constitutional axiom. And so that shows you, all you Canadians who are listening, and everyone outside of the country who might be the least bit interested in Canada, that shows you exactly what our bloody Constitution is worth. And if Canadians are so daft that they don't think that that's a problem, well, they're going to figure it out over the next 15 years because there's absolutely no excuse for this. So that's what I'm thinking. Now, there's part of me that's thinking, well, look, Peterson, the College of Psychologists is after you. You've taken it to court. Now the judges have decided that you're wrong. Maybe you're wrong. And I think, well, I expressed political sentiment and I'm actually informed. And so for the life of me, I can't see how I'm wrong. I think I have a responsibility to say what I think, and I think many people agree with that, and I think the fundamental consequence of that around the world has been massively beneficial to people. So I think, number one, what the hell? And number two, bring it on and see what happens. Because I will make absolutely every bit of this public in a way that the college and the courts can hardly even imagine.
Oh man, very, very interesting stuff. And I want you to just understand that this is Jordan Peterson talking about. I think we all understand how smart Jordan Peterson is. And even he thought, maybe I'm wrong. He got into this situation where he knows what he's saying is right. All he did, he talked about it. He said a bunch of stuff on Joe Rogan about climate change and how the World Economic Forum is pretty much pushing all of these things onto the general public, and it could have catastrophic results on human life. And these people don't care about that. All they care about is Mother Earth. And in this whole disguise of being these people who just care about Mother Earth, they, for some reason, don't care about human life and also want more power and are going to gain it through this whole thing of virtue, this planetary virtue that they claim to have. He just pushed against the narrative, pushed against his government. That's all he did. And then all of a sudden, this entity, this probably I don't want to say heavily, but more than likely heavily government funded entity that he's a part of, all of a sudden says that you have to be re-educated. Well, based on what? He conducts himself professionally. He knows how to do that. There's years of tape. There's hundreds, thousands of hours of tape of him being professional. But they said, you're not being professional. What was unprofessional about what he said and what he did? It's the fact that he was going against the narrative. And to that point, he knows to go against the narrative. He knows it's wrong. He made his points beautifully if you watch that episode of Joe Rogan, right? He still thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. It's wild what this kind of thing can do to you. And funny enough, when it comes to mass formation, the smarter you are, the more susceptible you are to it, which is very interesting as well. Maybe that's why they couldn't get me, baby. Maybe that's why they can't get me. None of these narratives can get me. He pushed against the narrative. And then, honestly, the same thing happened to Riley. When you think about it, he had his psychology association. Riley had the swim association. Both associations, and I know this sounds far-fetched, but the government can reach down and use these associations as arms. In Canada, for sure, with what's going on with Trudeau, without a doubt. And in the United States of America, of course we know that can happen. We know social media platforms and all sorts of platforms are used that way. And they had a narrative to push, and they made sure both of these people, Canada and the US, needed re-education. Just in case you think that you're leaps and bounds behind Canada in the whole, woke communist oppression race, not so much. This just happened to Riley Gaines. And this happened to Jordan Peterson, a year ago? So what, a year behind? You got to think about that. Let's move on here. We got another one. This one's a little harder to listen to because of the audio. This gentleman was actually in a real concentration re-education camp. It's a little echoey because he's just in a room. It's a little bit of an amateur interview, but I just want you to hear what he has to say in terms of what it was like for him.
And what kind of torture happened? Were detainees abused, or what kind of tricks did the communist cadres play?
I cannot tell of all kind of tortures in the concentration camp. There's the book written by Jonathan Sagan about the tortures in different concentration camps in Vietnam, published by Aurora Foundation. But I can talk only about my experience in my camp. Well, I have to tell you that life there is, to sum up, starvation, hard labor, and mental torture. In my camp, there is no physical torture in the South. There's no, in my camp. no physical torture, but mental torture. When you talk about mental torture, you talk about the threat, the all kind of pressure for you to behave and to show that you make progress in learning and doing hard labor to be released to your family.
So again, very short clip, but I just wanted to show that little part there, that there's this threat, this looming pressure to make progress. That's exactly what Riley Gaines and Jordan Peterson were both subjected to. Riley Gaines said it. She was like, and I'm going to show you the Tucker. We're going to move on to Tucker Carlson right now. Riley Gaines said if they didn't answer a question properly, they had to go through it again. Jordan Peterson right now, in his training, it's indefinite. This re-education that he has to go through is indefinite. And it's just until they feel he's learned his lesson. It is exactly like what's happening or what happened to that gentleman who's in an actual concentration camp. You were just there until you show progress. And if you don't, you are under the threat, for Jordan Peterson at least, of losing your license. Riley Gaines under the threat of losing her spot on the swim team, losing what she's worked for her whole life. It's wild, absolutely wild. But again, thank God she woke up. And the reason that she woke up was because of the power of speaking up. And now we're going to talk about how essential speaking up is. Because it's not just something that you do for yourself just to get it off your chest. There is that part. There is that responsibility part. But it's what happens, the ripples that can take place. And we're going to talk about that after this. Let's go.
Because it sounds like this is a feature of human nature. People are this way, always. Can you think of examples where mass formation was stopped before it became totalitarianism by a small group of people standing up and saying no?
Oh, definitely. The first totalitarian systems in history were the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany in the first half of the 20th century. But there were trends towards totalitarianization at several places in the world. And in most places, they stopped.
Well, all through Europe.
Yes, they stopped. And the problem in the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany was that the resistance at a certain moment decided to go underground and to stop speaking out in public space. That happened in 1930 in the Soviet Union and around 1935 in Nazi Germany. And within 6 months, in both countries, the destruction campaigns started. Within 6 months, the destruction campaign started. So there is a almost perfect correlation between the resistance that stops to speak out and the start of the atrocities and cruelties in a country. Simply because if you understand the mechanism, then you know, like mass formation is a kind of hypnosis. It's identical. It's exactly the same. In a hypnotic procedure, there is someone, a hypnotist, who focuses the attention of someone else on one aspect of reality, for instance, an object that is swinging on a chain or something. And once the attention is focused on that one aspect of reality, all the rest of reality disappears. All the rest of reality, it is as if the rest of reality doesn't exist anymore. And this mechanism is extremely strong. A simple hypnotic procedure is sufficient to focus someone's attention so much on one aspect of reality that the person won't notice anymore that there is a surgeon who cuts through the skin, through the flesh, even straight through the breastbone to perform an open heart operation. That happens all the time in a university hospital in Belgium. There is a professor, Elisabeth Femonville, who uses this simple procedure to focus a patient's attention on something, and then the surgeon can do no matter what he wants, cut through the breastbone, the patient won't notice it. So that's the power of this mechanism of the focusing of attention. Exactly the same happens in a mass formation. First, people start to deal with all kinds of emotions that are no longer coupled to mental representations. And then all these emotions, all this anxiety are focused on one point, and consequently, the people don't notice anymore that they lose everything. that they lose their health, their wealth, the future of their children, and so on. That's exactly what happens in a mass formation. So once you understand that the mechanism of mass formation is a kind of hypnosis, you understand that it is a phenomenon that is always provoked by the voice of someone, the leaders of the masses who use indoctrination and propaganda to continue the mass formation, and then you also understand that if you want to disturb the mass formation, then you have to continue to speak out, that the dissonant voices have to continue to speak out. If the dissonant voices, if the people who do not go along with the masses continue to speak out, they won't succeed in waking up the masses. Sometimes someone will wake up, but usually the people will continue to be in the grip of the mass formation. But that doesn't mean that their speech has no effect. Not at all. Their speech will constantly disturb the hypnosis to a certain extent, and it will prevent the hypnosis to become so deep that the people become convinced that they have to destroy everyone who doesn't go along with them. From the 19th century onwards, scholars like Gustave Le Bon have described that the people who are not in the grip of the mass formation that their speech has exactly this effect. It doesn't wake them up, but it disturbs the mass formation, and it makes sure that it doesn't go so deep that the masses start to commit atrocities. And in this way, that's from a strategical point of view, quintessential. In this way, what will happen is the following. The masses are always self-destructive, and they will slowly exhaust themselves. They will exhaust themselves and destroy themselves before they destroyed the people who do not go along with them. So once you understand that the first and foremost strategical principle that you have to follow is that you have to continue to speak out. And at the same time, it's also an ethical principle. As a human being...
Yes, it is an ethical principle.
It's an ethical principle. As a human being, you have the ethical duty to articulate these words that seem sincere and honest to you, no matter what the consequences are. And if you do that, we have numerous examples described by Solzhenitsyn, by Primo Levi, by Viktor Frankl. If you do that, something wonderful will happen. If you stick to your ethical principles, when the world dehumanizes, you go through a very fast process of mental evolution. A very fast process of mental evolution as a human being. You start to become stronger and stronger and stronger as a human being at the mental level, and sometimes even at the physical level. If you read Solzhenitsyn, he gives these wonderful examples of how in the gulags, most people started to act in a beast-like manner.
Yes.
But there were some, a small minority, who went in exactly the opposite direction, who in this pool of darkness chose to try to represent humanity, and who became more and more determined to stick under all conditions, no matter how difficult it was, to their ethical principles. And Solzhenitsyn gives these wonderful examples in which he describes how these people very often survived the concentration camps and became even stronger while most others died within a few weeks or a few months. Of course, it's not a guarantee, but I think that if we understand that, we understand that the process of mass formation and everything that happens now, in a certain way, has meaning and purpose. It should motivate us to understand the value of ethical principles for a human being. It should make us more determined to continue to live according to ethical principles while the rest of the world leaves them behind. So,
let me just say this. One of the most amazing conversations I've ever had, and
oh man, to date, this is the most impact. Tucker's done a lot of interviews, and it's ramped up now that he's independent. But this was the best interview that I've seen him do, and I've said it before on the podcast. I think this is the interview that kind of woke him up and made him say, "Okay, I have to actually double down on this whole speaking up thing because it is essential." It is essential. So essential. The things that he said here, if you don't speak out, things get worse. And have we not seen that? When it comes to the whole, pronoun issue, when Jordan Peterson was speaking on it, he was the only one. He was the only one speaking on it. There's nobody else. Everybody else was like, well, what do you care? Who cares? Why is Joe Rogan having this guy on to talk about this? He's like, he's just some professor who's pretty much going to get fired over this. What does he care? And I say that because he did speak out and it did have impact. But if more people If there were 1,000 Jordan Petersons all speaking out at the same time, who knows where we'd be right now? We probably wouldn't be as far along in this whole woke movement if there were. So when you don't speak out, things just get worse. And it's so true. I mean, think about it. If you saw someone go into a girl's washroom, and I'm not even talking about LGBTQ, nothing. I'm not talking about that. I'm just seeing, you just see a guy, just some guy. You don't know pronouns, nothing. You're just far away. You're just watching some guy walk in there. If you don't do anything, things get worse for that community. The girls that are potentially in there, the parents who get the calls, the girls who now don't feel safe in their community. It's just bad all around. When you see somebody, if you see a bunch of guys walk into a Walmart or whatever, and they're taking a bunch of stuff and they're just indiscriminately just taking everything, they're basically looting the place, and you just stand there and watch or get your phone out, worse, which is what most people do, things get worse for that community. There are kids that watch and get scared. There are women who went there because they didn't think they needed their husbands, because they just figured, I'm just going out to get groceries. Who cares? And now all of a sudden you have some kids that are scared. You have some women that are scared. You have some men that are enraged. You have some employees who are traumatized. Some of them quit. Now they're at work every day and they don't know if that's going to happen again. All because people didn't stand up. People didn't speak up. Things get worse. And then another thing that he said when he was talking about the surgery, I liken that surgery part where he was talking about flesh and through the skin, through the flesh, right to the bone. I think that's what's happening with society. Like right now, these woke movements, whether it be a BLM type of thing or what, even if it's just racial, sexual preference, whatever it is, they have people's attention so much so that we don't, or a lot of people at least, don't realize that there is an unseen hand with a scalpel cutting through society, and they are cutting as deep as they can. You know? And then this is what I always liken it to with what this gentleman was talking about. When you speak up, it's like if you have a friend who's like falling asleep on you. I've said this before on the podcast. You have a friend and you're on the train or something and they just go like this. Like, what do you do with that friend? Sometimes you let him sleep because you're like, yeah, he's smashed, whatever, let him sleep. But a lot of the time you're like, we have like 30 minutes until we get home, an hour until we get home. Yo, get up. You nudge him awake and he goes, oh. And then he falls asleep a little bit, but it's not as deep. Whereas if you just let him sleep, he will get into a deep, deep, deep sleep. And then when it's time for your stop, you're going to be shaking him to wake up, and it's hard for him to wake up. But if you just keep waking him up periodically, if you just keep nudging him a little bit, that's what happens when you decide to speak up about certain things that are going on in society. You nudge people awake. And Leah Thomas, she had her view that trans women competing in women's sports does not threaten women's sports. And that was her view, and that's always been her view. But because Riley Gaines spoke up, Leah Thomas now banned from competing women's sports as swimming cracks down on transgender athletes. That's because she spoke up. She herself got woken up by that woman who yelled, "He's a cheater." She saw the protesters. She said, okay, this is wrong. She got into a situation where she got something taken from her that she worked so hard for. And then all of a sudden, this is wrong. Hold on. And that little thing, think about that. That woman who said, he's a cheater. And we're going to move on to some Piers Morgan clips in a second. That woman that said he's a cheater. That person nudged nudged Riley Gaines awake a little bit. And she almost went back to sleep. But then she went through that whole race thing where she tied and she didn't get the trophy and she wasn't acknowledged. And then she woke up again. That was another nudge, right? Sometimes the whole wildness of society actually nudges you awake. With her, that was the last straw. And then she stood up. And then she spoke out. And then what she speaking out did is this, what you see on screen right now, right? And now it's like, why am I showing this stuff to you? Why am I showing you Pierce Morgan? Because this is what it turned into for her. Somebody yelled, he's a cheater, and it nudged her awake enough that she went from just being a girl who was just going to be a great swimmer. Maybe she'd be an Olympian. I don't know. Or maybe she just would have pursued whatever she was taking in school and just done that. I think she wanted to go into like dentist or something like that. I'm not even sure. Maybe she just would have done that. But instead, now she's an activist.
You have trans
How does this
rights.
help
You
trans
know
people?
Do you have
that
any
it's
idea
difficult
how
to find your
difficult it
identity
is
and that people
to be a
accidentally
woman?
go down the
Riley
wrong
has a
path.
very good
We've
riposte.
discussed this before.
Hang on, Riley.
Doesn't make you right.
You mentioned you have no idea how difficult it is to identify as trans. Let me ask you, do you have any idea how difficult it is to be a woman in today's climate, and then to be entirely mocked by a man merely posing to be a
That's
woman?
how
Do
you
have
feel,
any
and that is not
how
true.
idea?
That is
How do you-
not
how do you-
Dylan's
yeah, but
intention.
why?
Well,
Dylan
that's not
is
just how I feel.
Dylan's
There's been an
intention is
avalanche.
not to
There has
mock
been an
women. Of
avalanche
course
of
it's
people
not.
on TikTok, on the left and the right, coming out now saying, "Hold on, this
Dylan
is wrong."
is a
And this isn't the first time that
beautiful
Dylan
human
Mulvaney has
being.
been under fire.
Here's the
His
thing.
first days of girlhood. He
I'm
came
not
out
gonna have a
after day
conversation with you, keep
365 or whatever
misgendering
day
her.
it was.
You can't compel people to do that.
Yes,
you
I
can't.
can,
No,
because
you
it's-
can't. You can call
It's
Dylan Mulvaney.
discrimination.
You can call Dylan
It's
Mulvaney
discrimination,
whatever
Piers.
you want.
It's discrimination.
But Riley Gaines, of all
And listen,
people,
Riley, I do sympathise with you,
You know
about
what?
how
No,
difficult
let
it is
me
to
tell
be
you
a
Riley
woman.
Gaines has
something.
had to
You know
compete
what?
against
Riley, I
biological
want to listen
males.
to how difficult it is to be a woman because I want to understand that. I know that's tough. As a gay man, I'm also a victim of the patriarchy. We all bloody are. Like, it's
Look, we don't need to
bloody
do the
awful.
identity
I've seen the
politics.
Barbie movie.
You are
Let me tell you
part of the
something.
patriarchy.
You
What are you
mentioned-
talking
I've
about?
read the book. I
You
understand, but
mentioned
you're
mentioned discrimination.
you being a
You
woman.
mentioned discrimination.
Let Riley
Let me
speak.
tell you
Stop talking
something.
over the
Do
woman.
you
I haven't
believe
finished my
that it's
point. No one's
okay?
allowing me to finish a point.
What's your point?
Am I
Go
allowed
ahead.
to speak?
Sure.
God, okay, fine, I finished.
What's your point? You haven't got one, have
My
you?
point, no, I
Riley.
have. My point is, Riley, that
Let me
it's-
say something.
I understand how hard it is
Okay,
to be
go
a woman
ahead.
and that you fought so hard to be a woman, and I have so much empathy with that, so I can understand why it is so upsetting when, in your view, someone who isn't a woman comes along and says they are, because it undermines all of the history of what women have been through.
Yes.
But that's not a trans
Well-
woman's fault. That is men's fault. Men are the problem, not Dylan, not trans women.
men are the problem.
Except
No,
trans
lying
women are
about
men.
objective
Men are the- of course,
proof
I
is
knew it
the
would come back
problem.
to us.
That is what the problem is.
Riley?
Are you saying it's not? Are you
Let me
saying
tell
you're
you
not
something.
a victim
You-
of men?
This is like half illustrating a point and half just hilarious. Absolutely silly. I'm not even going to show you what our Officer Tatum said. Officer Tatum said Dylan Mulvaney walks around with a 5 o'clock shadow. It was absolutely ridiculous. Can't say things like that. Here, I'm going to play another clip.
And at the same time, you want to blame the
I'm
patriarchy.
not. I want everyone to be kind to everyone.
Oh, no, you don't.
That's what. Yes, I
Hold
do.
on, stop right
yes,
there.
I do.
Don't even
It
like
is
me,
not
the
kind.
patriarchy. Want to
It
be
is-
kind to me?
It is not kind to ask a young girl to undress in front of a man. That is not kindness. What kindness
Right.
is. And if that's what you believe your definition of kindness is, you have a totally warped perception. And let me tell you, it's not inclusive to ask a girl like myself what happened to me and my teammates. It's not inclusive to ask us to smile and step aside and allow these men onto our podiums. That is not what inclusion is. That is exclusion. And it's exclusive to the very female athletes or women in general who Title IX in the women's sporting category was passed to protect and to honor and to celebrate and to uphold.
And
so I think
Riley-
we have
Riley,
very
for those
different
who-
definitions of what kindness really is.
Right, is that-
And I'm telling you right now, the reason that I'm showing you that right now is this is the ripple effect. Someone yells he's a cheater, it shakes her awake enough. She goes through a bunch of things, and now she's on Pierce Morgan debating people, standing tall in the fact in the beliefs that she had, that when she first had them, she didn't know how to even say it. She knew it was wrong, but she didn't know how to even talk about it. Now she's on shows talking about it. And right now, there's going to be a parent, there's going to be a kid, there's going to be somebody who feels the same way, or is going to be at a sporting event, or is going to be an athlete themselves, and they're going to remember the things that she said on this show, on Rogan, on Fox News, all sorts of publications, and they're going to be able to stand tall. Even this guy that she's arguing with right now, this dude right here, right in the middle, even that guy is going to be shaken awake a little bit. He is deep in his ideology. He probably goes to an echo chamber and he just sits there with his friends, and they all just talk about how great all this stuff is in theory, on paper. And for the first time, he has to actually sit in front of someone, Riley Gaines, who actually went through something that was hard, went through something that some girls will consider traumatizing. And he actually had to look her in the eye and hear that type of pain, hear what that's like, and hear that that's not kindness. And that's going to shake him awake a little bit. He's getting deep into slumber. She speaks up. It shakes him up a little bit. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of speaking up. Make sure you do. There are too many things going on in the world right now that are absolute batshit crazy for us to not speak up. When you're in public, not just online, not just on Twitter, but when you're in public, and I'm not talking about calls to violence. I'm never talking about that. But I'm just talking about, just say something. You have no idea the ripple effects that it could cause. And other than that, I'm out.